You are about to step into a truth that no man was meant to hear. Yet it happened, and it left behind a trail of madness that even the most learned physicians of the age dared not explain. In the old town of Milford, Massachusetts, stood a house built not of brick and timber, alone, but of grief and whispers, a house that belonged to Elias Hartwell, a man of impeccable dress, silver tongue, and wealth enough to command respect from every face that passed his gate. Yet behind that respectable smile was a hunger far stranger than greed, far colder than cruelty. They say the Hartwell blood carried a shadow, a stain older than the town itself, and older than the church bells that rang each Sunday. His line could be traced back to a forgotten sect in England, one that dined in candlelit rooms, speaking words that never appeared in Scripture. Elias carried their rituals across the sea and laid them into the foundation of his estate. His neighbors would only see the charm, the wealth, the grand gatherings, but the servants whispered of locked rooms and nights, where the air itself grew heavy. The women who entered his life entered a slow descent, each one chosen for her beauty, her wit, and something more intangible, something he alone could see, a glow in the mind perhaps, or a fire in the soul. Whatever it was, the glow always dimmed and the fire always went out. The first wife. Margaret began speaking to shadows in the hallway. Her words were soft at first, but soon they turned frantic, as if answering a voice only she could hear. The second wife. Eleanor claimed her dreams were being stolen. She would wake, gasping, clutching her temples and swearing that Elias stood at the foot of the bed, even when he swore he was not there. The third wife, Sarah, wandered the grounds at night, humming hymns in reverse, her bare feet cutting on the stones. The fourth wife, Jane, stopped speaking altogether, only staring at the wall for 8 hours, while her lips trembled as though forming words she could never say. And the fifth wife. Rebecca lived long enough for the town to witness her collapse in the town square, screaming at the church steeple, until her voice broke. 5 wives, 5 descents, into the same invisible pit, and through it all, Elias Hartwell never once appeared, touched by grief nor guilt. The town would call it curse or coincidence, but there are those who know better. Rebecca's screams did not end when her voice gave out, for they lived on in the silence that followed and in the eyes of those who had gathered to watch. The sheriff took her by the arm, leading her away with a look that spoke not of authority, but of fear, as if some part of him already knew that whatever had claimed the other 4 had now taken her as well. Elias Hartwell stood in the doorway of his home, during it all, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. His black coat hung like a shadow across the frame, and for a moment it seemed that the light around him bent ever so slightly, as if repelled by his presence. The next morning Rebecca was gone. Her bed was neatly made, her belongings untouched, and Elias claimed she had been sent to relatives in another state. Yet no letter ever came, no messenger ever arrived, and no one in that far-off place could be found to say she had appeared there. This was the final fracture for Milford. The whispers that had been confined to kitchens and back rooms now spilled into the streets, and the name Hartwell was spoken with lowered voice. The elders of the town recalled strange things about Elias's youth. He had been sent to England for several years, as a boy, to live with distant kin. He returned taller, sharper, and colder, with eyes that seemed to study people not as companions, but as puzzles to be taken apart. He spoke of ideas not taught in any school, of certain forces that could bend a mind without ever touching it, and of how the heart could be broken, not with cruelty, but with a gentle redirection of thought and will, it was said. He kept books bound in leather so dark it seemed to drink the light, and that within their pages were diagrams of the human mind, mapped like a labyrinth, with notes, in a language that no scholar in the region could name. The few servants who left his employ did so in the dead of night, taking nothing but the clothes on their backs, for they claimed the walls themselves could listen, and that the mirrors in certain rooms did not show one's face as it truly was. The house of Elias Hartwell had become more than a home. It had become a vessel for something old and unseen, and each wife had been another step in whatever design was unfolding in the mind of its master. The winter after Rebecca vanished came in heavier than any in living memory, and the Hartwell estate seemed to sink deeper into itself under the weight of the snow. The windows were always shuttered. The chimneys smoked at strange hours, and more than one traveler passing by claimed to hear music drifting out across the frozen fields. Not the kind one might hear in a church or parlor, but slow, winding notes that seemed almost to whisper rather than play. By then, the people of Milford no longer approached the Hartwell property without cause, and even the post riders began leaving letters at the edge of the long gravel drive, choosing not to see the figure that sometimes watched from an upstairs window. A month into the cold season, Elias appeared in town with a new wife. Her name was Lydia, and she was unlike the others. Pale, with hair so light it seemed almost white, she spoke rarely, and when she did, her words came out as if chosen carefully from some private code. The townsfolk noticed how her gaze lingered on certain objects or faces as if measuring them, and how she seemed to tilt her head slightly whenever someone spoke to her, as though she were listening for something. Beneath the words, Elias walked beside her, not as a man escorting his bride, but as one presenting a creation. Lydia moved into the Hartwell house, and for several weeks nothing was heard from her. Yet the servants whispered that she often stood in the great hall at night, staring at the massive portrait of Elias's ancestors, a line of stern, unsmiling figures, whose eyes seemed to follow a man from one side of the room to the other. Sometimes she would speak to the painting in a low voice, and once a maid swore she heard another voice answer back, deep and calm and far older than it had any right to be. Then it began again. The tremors in the hands, the nights spent pacing the corridors, the strange laughter echoing down the sty. Well, the town doctor was summoned once but did not return, and when asked about it later, he only said that he had no wish to speak of what he had seen. Lydia's decline was swifter than the others, and when she disappeared, there was no pretense of sending her to relatives. The Hartwell estate simply absorbed her, and the door to her room was locked without explanation. By spring the earth thawed, yet the Hartwell grounds did not soften. Instead of the scent of wet soil and blooming lilac, there lingered an odor that made the air heavy and the tongue taste of copper. Elias emerged again in the village, this time with a smile too wide for the occasion, and beside him a new wife. Margaret, dark-haired and sharp-featured, she had been seen before in the company of certain traveling lecturers. Men who spoke on subjects respectable society preferred to pretend did not exist. She seemed to possess a confidence the others lacked. Her eyes met every gaze without hesitation, and when she first walked into the Hartwell house, the servants later swore the air seemed to shift, as if a new presence had joined an old contest. For a time, Margaret did not falter. She walked the halls freely, ignored the locked doors, and once even ordered Elias himself to leave her be. The neighbors noticed fewer late-night lights, fewer drawn curtains, but they also heard strange sounds in the woods behind the estate, rhythmic knocks answered by distant echoes. Some swore they saw Elias and Margaret together, near the edge of the tree line, their heads tilted, listening as if for a signal no one else could hear. It was during this brief season of uneasy calm that the town began to question whether the curse lay with Elias at all. Perhaps they thought it belonged to the land or to something deeper still, a shadow stitched into the Hartwell lineage before the house was even built. Yet this theory began to fray when Margaret's laughter started drifting from the windows at odd hours. Not the sound of amusement, but of someone playing with words not meant for others to hear. Her voice carried the cadence of an unseen conversation, and the maids whispered that she had begun visiting Lydia's locked room, standing there for hours, without touching the handle. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning when Margaret walked into the village square barefoot and covered in black ash. She stood silently in the center until every eye was upon her, then simply turned and began walking back up the long road to the estate. No one followed, but from that day forward, she was never seen again by anyone beyond the Hartwell gates. The pattern had resumed, and Elias showed no sign of slowing. The village began to talk in hushed fragments, as if words themselves might draw the wrong attention. Margaret was gone, her absence absorbed into the same dark ledger that held Lydia and the others. Elias appeared in public only rarely now, and when he did, his gaze swept over faces without recognition, as though he were walking through a dream he did not wish to wake from. The Hartwell house stood taller than the trees, its chimneys breathing a slow, thin smoke that curled into the sky, like the signal of a watchtower. The servants who remained grew pale and silent, their movements deliberate, their eyes downcast, as if every step within those walls might awaken something. In the attic, a single lamp burned night after night. A boy delivering milk before dawn claimed he saw Elias there through the narrow window, standing beside a covered frame. Perhaps a mirror, perhaps something worse. The boy swore that behind Elias, another face appeared for a heartbeat, a woman's face, though not Margaret's, not Lydia's, not anyone he recognized. And then the curtain fell shut. By midsummer, a fifth wife arrived. Her name was Elena. Her beauty was not the fragile kind, but the kind that could command a room without words. The first evening she was seen, she stood on the Hartwell balcony, staring out over the village, her hands resting on the rail, as if taking measure of what was hers by right. Some felt a strange relief, believing perhaps she might break the chain, but others sensed she had been chosen for something beyond marriage. She moved through the estate, as if she already knew every hallway, every stairwell, every hidden turn, and her voice carried with the authority of someone who had been here before. Days turned into weeks, and yet the villagers could not decide whether Eleanor was thriving or unraveling. She never ventured beyond the gates, yet she seemed to receive visitors no one else ever saw. The sound of sea, carriage wheels on gravel. At midnight, the muffled murmur of conversations in the garden, the flash of a lantern extinguished before being fully glimpsed. One farmer passing by swore he saw her burying something small and silver at the base of an old elm, but when he looked again, she was gone. The Hartwell house was no longer simply a place where wives vanished. It was becoming a vessel for something older than Elias himself, something that would outlive them all. The first signs were almost too subtle to notice at all. A tremor in Eleanor's hand as she poured tea, a pause, mid-sentence, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. A faint rust-colored stain at the cuff of her gown that no one dared to mention. The staff whispered that the fifth Miss Hartwell had begun walking the halls long after midnight, her bare feet silent on the oak floors. Her eyes open, but unseeing, one maid claimed that on such a night she followed her from a distance through the winding corridors until Eleanor descended into a part of the house no servant had entered in years. The door at the base of the cellar steps was always locked, yet it swung open for Eleanor without resistance. The maid swore she saw her enter a narrow passage lit by no torch and lined with walls carved with names and dates, names no Hartwell bore. Dates that reached back centuries. Elias himself seemed altered. He was no longer the commanding master of the estate, but a man who moved cautiously in his own home. His eyes followed Eleanor as though trying to anticipate her next step, and there was a tension in his jaw that suggested fear, not control. It was as if the roles within the house had shifted without anyone speaking of it. The husband no longer possessed the wife, but rather lived at her mercy. The villagers began reporting strange phenomena. The church bell rang, though no one was in the tower. Ivstock refused to graze near the Hartwell property, and those who passed on the road spoke of a low, droning hum that seemed to seep from the ground itself. Children were kept indoors after dark, and the older ones told each other that the Hartwell house was not a house at all, but a mouth waiting to swallow the next soul foolish enough to cross its threshold. By the harvest moon, Eleanor no longer bothered to disguise her absences. She could be seen standing in the garden with her head loaded toward the night sky, her lips moving in words no one could hear. The flowers nearest her feet wilted within days, and yet she remained vibrant, untouched. Whatever had taken the other wives did not seem to be hunting Eleanor. It was standing beside her, waiting. It began with the smell of faint sweet rot that clung to the hallways in the early hours, before the sun could burn it away. Servants scrubbed the floors, scoured the walls, even burned herbs in the fireplaces. But the scent remained as though the very air in the house was steeped in decay. Eleanor did not seem to notice. She moved through the rooms with a slow, deliberate grace, as if she were pacing out a ritual known only to her, and whatever unseen thing had taken up residence. Elias withdrew further into himself. He stopped attending church and ignored letters from his business partners, preferring to remain in his study with the door bolted. From outside the keyhole, one might hear him murmuring questions and waiting, as if for an answer, in a voice too low for human ears. At night, when the servants slept, the scratching began, first on the ceilings, then in the walls, then under the beds, until no one in the house could rest without a candle lit beside them. One storm swept in from the north with a violence that rattled every pane of glass in the estate. And it was during that night the first of the animals vanished. The stablemaster swore he had locked the barn, but come morning, the door hung open, and the air was thick with the same sickly odor that haunted the halls. Eleanor smiled faintly at the news, and said only that it was necessary. The stablemaster quit the next day, without collecting his pay. The villagers no longer pretended they did not notice something was wrong. They crossed themselves when they passed the Hartwell gates and whispered of curses. Old as the soil under their feet, the oldest among them recalled stories of a pact made long before Elias was born, a bargain struck to keep the land fertile in exchange for something more precious than crops. Inside the house, Eleanor began rearranging the furniture without explanation. Entire rooms stripped bare, while others were crowded with chairs, mirrors, and covered shapes draped in white cloth. The staff avoided these rooms altogether, for beneath the cloth they could swear they saw movement slow and pulsing, as if whatever was hidden there was breathing. Elias avoided confronting her. Yet there were moments in the candlelight when his eyes would lock on hers, and for the briefest heartbeat, his expression would betray the truth. He knew exactly what had taken the others, and now he knew it had not taken Eleanor at all. It had chosen her. The night the screams began, no one in the village could sleep. The howling tore through the darkness like a beast unleashed, tearing at the fabric of sanity itself. From the Hartwell estate came shouts and cries, mingled with strange guttural noises that no human throat could produce. The servants barricaded themselves in the kitchen, refusing to answer the desperate banging at the doors. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with panic. Eleanor moved through the halls with wild eyes, wild hair, and a voice that cracked with something far beyond fear. She spoke to shadows as if they were old friends, warning them to stay back, to leave the house untouched for now. But Elias was nowhere to be found, only a trail of overturned furniture and shattered glass where he had once stood. In the library, the mirror woman revealed herself in full terror. A figure half seen in reflections, flickering on cracked glass, her face a blur of sorrow and rage. Her voice whispered through the cold air, calling out secrets long buried, pleading for justice or vengeance. No one could tell which. As the night deepened, furniture began to move of its own accord. Doors slammed open and shut with violent force, trapping terrified staff in rooms where the walls seemed to breathe. Eleanor's mind unraveled further. She clawed at her own reflection, accusing it of betrayal and deceit, while the mansion groaned and whispered ancient curses. The very foundation trembled, as if the house itself was alive and angry, for its secrets were being unearthed too soon. A shard of broken mirror sliced through Eleanor's palm, her blood mingling with the dust on the floor, marking the beginning of something darker. By dawn, the village was silent. Only the echo of distant wails remained, and a house left standing on the edge of ruin, with eyes that watched unseen, waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to enter. Its halls held a promise that whatever darkness had awoken was not done yet. The morning after the terror, the villagers gathered hesitantly by the edge of the estate. Hushed whispers filled the cold air, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Many had heard the screams, while others saw shadows, darting behind the cracked windows. No one dared approach the house yet. Everyone knew the darkness that lingered within would not remain hidden much longer. Don Carlos stood among them, his jaw set with grim determination. His daughter's fate had become a symbol of a deeper evil, festering in their midst. He spoke quietly, urging caution, but promising justice. The townsfolk nodded, though their eyes betrayed uncertainty. They had heard rumors of the mansion's secrets, but now those whispers had taken shape into something terrifyingly real. Sarah Quinn, the housekeeper, stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear beneath. Her testimony would change everything. She spoke of the medicines administered with silent cruelty, the hidden passages, and the sinister uses they served. Her words painted a picture of betrayal and manipulation that shook the community to its core. The villagers resolved to confront the truth, no matter how dark. For too long, the Hartwell mansion had cast a shadow over their lives. Now they would pull back the veil and expose the rot hidden behind its grand facade. Yet even as they prepared to act, an uneasy feeling settled over them, as if the house itself watched and waited, ready to fight back with all the malice it had amassed through years of secrets. The villagers gathered courage as the days passed. Their fear hardened into resolve. Led by Don Carlos, they formed a plan to take control of the mansion and uncover its darkest secrets. Sarah Quinn's testimony gave them the knowledge they needed to navigate the hidden passages and avoid the traps set by Jeremiah Hartwell. Elena's condition improved steadily. Without the poisonous medicines, her mind cleared, and the terrifying visions faded. She began to share everything she remembered about the surveillance and the conspiracies woven through the walls of the house. Her words fueled the villagers' determination to bring justice for Margaret and Elena. Inside the mansion, shadows of the past seemed to stir. Jeremiah's hold was slipping, but he remained calm and calculating, preparing his final moves in a game of deception and power. The estate, once a symbol of wealth and respectability, now became a battleground between truth and lies, between those seeking justice and the forces desperate to conceal the past. The stage was set for a reckoning that would shake the community and rewrite the history of Millbrook forever. Elena's voice echoed through the mansion's halls as she recounted the secrets hidden in plain sight. Her revelations cast long shadows over every corner of the estate. The villagers listened in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of betrayal, but also burning with the hope of justice. Don Carlos stood firm, his resolve unshaken. He vowed to protect his daughter and ensure the truth would no longer be buried beneath layers of deceit. The evidence in their hands was a key to unlocking a justice long denied. Jeremiah Hartwell's calm facade began to crack as the walls closed in round him. The mansion that once granted him power became his prison. The hidden passages no longer shielded secrets, but exposed them to the light. The era of silence was ending, and with it, the reign of a man who had weaponized trust and poisoned lives. The story of the Hartwell mansion became a chilling reminder of how darkness can lurk behind respectability and how courage can ignite even in the deepest shadows. Elena's voice rang clear through the shadowed halls of the mansion. She revealed truths hidden behind walls and mirrors, secrets long kept from prying eyes. The villagers absorbed every word, their hearts heavy with dread, yet stirred by hope for justice. Don Carlos stood tall, unwavering in his promise to safeguard his daughter and bring light to the darkness lurking within the house. The documents they held were weapons against silence, keys to unlock the cages of lies and deceit. Jeremiah Hartwell's composed mask began to crumble as his empire of shadows collapsed. The mansion's hidden corridors no longer sheltered secrets, but revealed them, exposing the man who had twisted trust into a weapon. The time of reckoning had arrived, ending his cruel dominion. The tale of the Hartwell mansion serves as a haunting reminder that beneath respectability can dwell malevolence, and that courage can rise to confront even the darkest of evils. Elena's voice still echoes through the halls. Her story, a testament to resilience and truth. The mansion, once a prison, now a symbol of revelation and hope. As shadows recede, the light of justice shines bright, guiding those who dare to listen and believe.